What is going on, everybody? It is the weekly Rye Report. Oh my goodness. A little late this week, that's okay. Had some difficulty fitting it in the schedule to get it recorded, but I wanted to get it recorded before looking at the power rankings today. This is being recorded on Sunday morning, and typically we do the power rankings Sunday night, so I wanted to get my opinions in about the metagame before, I fact-check them with the power rankings, because this series is more about a prediction of the metagame and a estimation of decks' power levels. And it's kind of nice because then you can compare that with the power rankings, which is what actually happened. Rye Report theory, power rankings, what actually happens, what actually scored the top 5. Because sometimes you just need the hard proof and the data, but then other times when the meta is constantly in flux, or you have a weak meta game like the one that we've seen ourselves in since the nerf, you get a lot of wonky decks in the power rankings. So sometimes it's good to shift through and just to see what a tier list would look like. So without further delay, let's get into this general metagame that we're in, starting with Tier 1 Harpy Ladies. There's just no two ways about it. Harpy Lady is the best deck of the format. It's interesting because it's not the deck that's warping the format around it, it's just the best one. The deck that's actually warping the format is Melodious. Every deck that's playing in tournaments right now needs a Melodious out. The Bloom Diva is causing a lot of issues for decks. So some people are putting in Chalices, trying to tech in Chalice, trying to tech in other effect negation, or they're just, putting in outs like the Malevolent Sin to temporarily get rid of it, try to OTK through it, etc., etc. They're the ones that are setting up the metagame, and Harpies are their direct counter. But more importantly, Harpies also do well against literally everything else in the metagame, because they're all trying to counter Melodious, and then Harpies come in and destroy your back row, and then you have no plays left after that. Harpies, great swarming potential, great board control, a bajillion starters. They can get into their combos through Channeler, through Perfumer, through Swallow's Nest. It's going to be very rare that this deck bricks. It's pretty much the most consistent one we have in our metagame. And yeah, Harpy Ladies looking strong. Now, I say this on stream all the time, because Harpy Ladies are the strongest deck, and because they're such a weak deck on top of that, it doesn't really matter that they're the top deck. Because this is the type of metagame that I prefer, where the top deck is so weak that we're able to play whatever we want and have multiple victories. We had crazy things like Deskbots winning a tournament this week. Noble Knights won a tournament this week. There's been a lot of decks that should not be winning tournaments that are winning tournaments because the strongest deck, quote unquote, ain't really that strong. It's not that unbeatable. So it causes a lot of the top 8 breakdowns that you see, even though Harpies generally will be like the most represented in the top cut. The graph is usually very, very diverse. It's not a very large percentage that they end up taking. So there you go. Good job to Harpies. Melodious here in Tier 2. Melodious is one of the ones where I was kind of not sure where to put them, because on one hand, they do be feeling like a Tier 1 deck sometimes, because literally, like, you look at people's side decks, and all they have are counters to Melodious, right? Like, that's the only deck they're trying to focus down right now. That, and then, like, Poisonous Wind to stop Harpies, because not much you can really say against Harpies besides that. But it hasn't really been performing like a Tier 1 deck. I believe it got shared 3rd, 4th place with Magnets last week. And I don't know what they are this week because I haven't looked at it yet. But I already know it's not going to be pretty, because they've actually kind of struggled this week. This is whenever there's a new deck in the metagame, it's always heavily focused by the side deck. So it always kind of gets blasted by every deck in the metagame, and then they have to kind of adapt. And they haven't really adapted as well as I thought they would. But they're still optimizing. It's not, the end of the road for them. So in terms of performance, they probably performed like a Tier 3 deck, if we're being honest, this previous week. but they're warping the meta as if they're a tier 1 deck. So, hey, meet them halfway, put them in tier 2. I think they fit perfectly in tier 2. I think the following week is going to be super interesting because they could easily level up to tier 1 if the deck gets optimized more, or if people start targeting Harpies again in their side deck. I could see Melodious going up to tier 1, or if they continue on their current path, they're probably going to end up back in tier 3. Just kind of chill there, and it'll be fine for them. Either way, they're still warping the metagame. You still have to play around them specifically because they have the kind of toxic stall cards to stop you, so you kind of have to take them into consideration. Also, Melodious single-handedly killed off a bunch of decks that, you would have seen on here before, but no longer see on here anymore. Blue Eyes White Dragon, Thunder Dragon, Gaia, all these decks that, used to be staples of the metagame, or staples at least in the rogue category, are essentially gone. We're in a very bounce-heavy meta, that just is not very destruction-based. So things like Gaia, things like Blue Eyes, all these decks can't take on Melodious, exited the metagame. Harpies didn't make those decks exit the metagame. Melodious did. So, I got to give props to them for doing that, single-handedly killing off a bunch of the common dueling staples that we had. So, there you go. Props to them. Water Exceed! This one I was consider putting tier 3, but then I was like, man, I don't know. Water had an amazing week. Water honestly had an amazing week, and I think we'll continue having an amazing week. The Water Exceed deck, a lot of people were always like, well, they just get so lucky, they top deck, all this stuff. But what a lot of people actually fail to remember, the best strength when it comes to Water Exceed is their small core, which means they have a lot of tech space, which means if we're in a very tiny metagame, which you could argue this is, almost a 2-deck format. Not really, because Water Exceeds kind of comes in as a third deck. They can specify their side deck to the point where they can basically make themselves anti-meta against whatever deck they're going up against. The smaller the metagame, the better Water Exceed will perform. And Water Exceed at a base level, just the core, is stronger than most of the rogue strategies that'll be left over that want to deal with Harpies or Melodious, right? They don't have to worry about dealing with things like Thunder Dragon or anything like that that may give them some potential trouble. They just have to deal with decks that have a lot of bounces and stuff like that, which they can do well against. And on top of that, playing things like Necro Valley just kind of shuts down most rogue strategies. So they don't have to worry about losing to rogue decks. They just have to focus on taking down Harpies and Melodious. And for the most part, they chill after that, Their baseline power is good against everything else. And then they just kind of chill against the rest of the metagame. Say, I'm Water, I'm going to Diva, I'm going to Necro Valley, I'm going to TTH, and I'm going to win. There's nothing you can do about that. GG easy. So there you go. Tier 2. I'm excited to see what they do in the power rankings. I already know it's going to be high. First or second for sure. It's either first or second. It's just done so much crazy stuff this week. It has not dropped out of the metagame like we thought in the original. So there you go. Tier 3, we've got both Magnets and Yo Sin Ju. They're kind of on here for the same reason, to be honest. They're both kind of D-draw decks right now. D-draw is just powerful enough to be in the metagame, and they're both kind of like really good users of it. Magnets have Gorgonic Guardian, which is just an amazing card. We talked about it when it came out on this channel a little bit. But the effect negation followed up with the pop is just so good. It's good against Bloom Diva. Harpies... they also have Magnetic Field. Can't forget Magnetic Field, which is really good against Melodious. Against Harpies, it's not the greatest thing against Harpies, but they do have the option of not setting their back row, or any back row they do set will be things like Powerful Rebirth and stuff like that, so Harpies aren't going to be popping it too much. They play a bunch of hand traps like Kiteroid and stuff as well, so it's really hard to lethal them with the Harpy attack points that they have. They don't have like a 4K beat stick that comes out and just one-shots the Magnet player. So it's very easy for them to set up Berserkion and Gorgonic, Magnetic Field for the bounces. It's just a very, very solid strategy. Unironically, if you take Water Exceed out of the formula, one of the better, generic Exceeds, I guess you could call them, decks that we have, where Water is very specific to the Water archetype because they're, limited by skill. just a pretty solid strategy right now. It's got outs to the main contenders in the metagame, mostly Melodious, but it doesn't have too many outs against Harpies. But you do see success with it, which is super cool. Awesome tier 3. Yosenju, same vein with Yosenju. They've got bounces, which it makes Melodious's life awful. We're definitely in a bounce meta. Try to get as much bounces as possible, which Harpies are the best at. But Yosenju can do it as well as, you know, they got the Kama 1, they got the Yosenju Sword Sting. They, of course, have the hand traps, Oh Yeah Majama, Kiteroid, all that, Sphere Karibo if they want to play it. And the Izna, Search Potential. This is, I'm talking about normal Yosenju, not Pendulum Yosenju. Pendulum Yosenju is irrelevant when we're talking meta. But, you know, same thing pretty much, just... And then, of course, they have the Utopic Ray package. If things are going really, really bad, just Utopic Ray your opponent, no problem. No problem whatsoever. Let's see what else we have here. We also have Resonators. Oh my goodness, getting into the Rogue. Rogues are a little spicy. There's been a lot of decks that have been doing very well. Like I said, this is a weak meta game. We've seen heroes win. We've seen Deskbots win. When I'm looking at rogues, I'm specifically looking at rogues who've consistently done really, really well this past week. Perfect timing for this song. Come on, by the way. Not planned. It just... Anyway, Resonators have been doing extremely well. Also, considering the skill is currently bugged and or mistranslated, we still don't actually know. And they could potentially be getting a minor buff in the near future. With how scuffed they are, they're actually doing very well right now. They've again won another tournament this week. They've been to the finals numerous times. They keep getting top cuts. I believe there was 2 in the top cut during Battle Step, and just in general are having a pretty good time in this metagame. Against Melodious, they have, of course, the Dark End Dragon that can just send away the Melodious monster. It's mostly the Schwaberta that's more of a pain for the strategy, being banishing the Wild Wind, banishing the tuners. It kind of sucks against them. So they're kind of dealing with that right now. But of course, there's things like Chalice and stuff like that that you can always adjust and try to play around. And then Harpies, I mean, it's really hard for Harpies to even OTK the Resonator deck, so they can kind of grind through Harpies as long as they don't run out of resource. And that's kind of been the big problem with them, being forced to play the Red Nova and the Red Dragon Archfiend. They're essentially playing a 5-card extra deck now because those cards are generally useless. You know, sometimes you see them get their use in, but especially now that Melodious has pushed us away from a destruction-based meta and into a bounce-based meta, Red Nova just isn't doing anything anymore. You know, if Thunder Dragon and Gaia and all that was still relevant, sure, he'd be great. But right now he's irrelevant, and that's keeping the deck kind of out of the metagame because they're wasting so many resources having to play bad cards, essentially. That they need to play. They're being forced to play. If they didn't have to, it would 100% be a tier 3 deck. No problem. And then Noble Knights. Oh my goodness, Noble Knights and Rogue. That's right. It's not just the one person carrying them in tournaments. We actually had a couple people get really high top cuts with them, and we had someone win a tournament with Noble Knights. Unironically, Noble Knights are pretty good against the Melodious deck. It's actually kind of, if you guys watch the battle step between them, they had to go back-to-back Melodious to get to the finals for battle step, and it kind of makes them look really silly. Their best play is Schwaberta to try and banish all the Noble Equips, Gwynnefer, and the traps. And that's not really that great of a play, if we're being totally honest. The Noble Knight player can just play around that, and then Melodious kind of just folds. The only problem with them is, of course, Noble Knights are really bricky, so they most of the time end up just losing to themselves. And then the Harpy matchup can be really tough. The Harpy matchup, the Noble Knight player literally has to go first and open up a really good hand, at least Madrop, ideally Merlin, plus an equip card. And if they don't, it's just an automatic L when it comes to Harpies. Any other scenario, you just automatically lose to Harpy Ladies. If they go second versus Harpy Ladies, that's almost guaranteed to be an L unless they open a Parallel Twist or a Book of Moon, something like that, to stop the Harpies from killing them off. Otherwise, this without Harpies in the metagame, Noble Knights would be a tier 3, maybe even like a tier 2, to be honest. You know, they just have really good matchups against pretty much everything else. It's just that one Harpy Lady deck that's keeping them at bay as of right now. And that's pretty much it. I'm excited to see power rankings, to see how my prediction / tier list update goes. This is definitely not the solved meta tier list. There's definitely going to be a few more changes before the end, but I don't think any new decks will be introduced from the current card pool that we have. I think whatever the meta is, it's going to be these 5 decks. Just their places may shift from time to time. And then, of course, the rogues. I think the rogues will... I don't think any of the rogue decks are going to break into the tier list. Unless the Resonator skill was actually a buff. I don't think that's going to happen. There will be DDDs by the time we get to the next Rye report. I don't know if they'll do anything by then, but... you know, they'll be included. And I'm excited to see how the power rankings turn out, which that video should come out tomorrow. And should be exciting. Thank you guys for watching. Till the next one.